This is Stephanie from Spinsters in the Making blog on Weebly, and today I am working on the number 34 passion block for the Sewcialites quilt along. I'm doing the 9-inch block, and for that you're going to need two 5-inch squares in your background, and what you're going to do with the square is cut diagonally twice to get 8 triangles total out of those 5-inch squares. And then the next piece you're going to need 4 2 by 2 3/4 inch triangles. From your print, you're going to need you're going to need 4 2-inch by 4.5 inch rectangles, and then 4 2 3/4 inch squares, and 1 2-inch square. So originally with this piece, this was a 5-inch square, and they were cut. It looked like this basically, and you cut corner to corner on both of their squares to get these triangles. So now that we have those, we're going to set those aside, and we're going to work on, well actually we'll need those, but we're going to be working with our C and A fabric. So your C fabric is your 2 by 4.5 inch rectangles, and what you're going to do with those triangles that you cut is you're going to take 2 of them, and with your good sides facing up so that when you fold them in, your good sides are facing together, you're going to start off with sewing these pieces together like this. So you'll fold this over, sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, fold this one over, sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and press in towards your darker print. And you're going to make 4 of those total with these rest of these pieces to get 4. So once I've created these 4, I'll come back to you, and then we will work on putting the center block together as well. I have finished these triangular parts that are going to go onto the center block once that is completed. So you can also do the center block first if you want to, and then do the triangle pieces. But either way, it will get done all at the same time. So now that we have those, I'm going to start with that center block. E fabric is in the middle, and that is your 2-inch square. And then you're going to need your rectangular backgrounds and your 4 print squares. And so of course these are going to go in the corners like this. If I can get them apart. And then you'll put these rectangles right in the middle between your squares. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all of this. I'll sew these 3 strips together and then fold them down and sew these together. I'm going to be pressing towards my darker print blocks for all of these. And then once this is all completed, this is when these wings will go on here and here and here. So I will come back to you once I have this whole entire middle square completed. 1/4 inch seam allowance on all these strips, starting with this one, then working that together, and then folding them down, sandwiching it to make nice points because I'm going to be pressing towards my print, and then sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance across here. And then I'll come back and we'll add these on. I've finished making my center block, and I've pressed towards my dark squares and my center square. So that way, when we take these pieces and fold them up, these points will be sandwiched nicely. So what you can do is you can fold it up, pin, and make sure this is nice and aligned. So with 1/4 inch seam allowance across, and then once that is set, then you can also trim some of this off a little bit here and here, and then repeat on the bottom. Take this, make sure your seams are nice and sandwiched here. So with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, trim off a little bit of the extra on the either end, and then press them out toward or in towards your square, and then you will be adding the second wings onto the other end once you've done that. So I'm going to take these 2, fold them, sandwich, making sure that these seams align. So with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then trim a little bit of this excess fabric off at the edge, not too much, and then come over and do these. And I will come back to you once I have completed all of this, and we will have the finished block for trimming. So I am back, and this is actually take 2 of this block. So originally I was going to show you how to cut the square down, and I will again, but I made a mistake and I cut it down to 9 inches instead of 9.5 inches because you need that extra bit for when you're sewing the rest of your blocks on to make it a total of 9 inches. So after a few cuss words and a little bit of thought, I managed to salvage this middle block since it had not been cut into, and I seam ripped these pieces off, and then of course I cut new pieces here and here, sew those together, and now I am actually going to show you how to trim it down to 9.5 inches. So for that, you're going to need to figure out the middle of your block, which is 4 3/4 inches, and that will be the center point of your block. So I'm going to take this. I have my grid. I'm going to find 4 3/4 inches here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line as much as I can up with my points. So this is hitting a point on my square here. This is hitting the point here. 4 3/4 is hitting me here. And then I'm also hitting right here as well. So what I'm going to try and do is trim what I can off, and then we will have, I might have to scoot it over a little bit more. I'm hitting 9.5 right here, but I seem to have room over here. So I am going to scooch this over just a little bit to try and not shave off as much over here. And another reason why you want to make sure you try and like get this as square as possible when you're sewing these strips on is that you're not going to have to trim off as much as you would have to sometimes. So this one will not be the most squarest block I have made, but I will make it work once I sew everything on. So I'm looking around, trying to find a medium ground, so that way whenever I do a 1/4 inch seam allowance over here, it's gonna hide some of this unevenness when I sew it to another block and will be hidden. So a 1/4 inch seam allowance can hide a multitude of sins if you don't completely get your block straight. So I'm only gonna have a little bit here and here that's not making it to 9.5, a little bit here and that's not making it to 9.5, and then a little bit here and here that's not making it to 9.5. So that is how we're gonna make this block work for us this time around. So, and luckily there will be enough here and here, so that way when I'm lining it up with another block to sew on, I know that this will be hitting 9.5, and I can line that up and then just do that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And as you can see, all of it will be caught with a 1/4 inch seam allowance when I'm finally sewing it on to my completed quilt. So now I think I'm about equal for all of this. I'm going to trim off this little bit of excess here and here. I'm a human just like everybody else. I make mistakes, and sometimes my blocks are not perfect, but I make them work. And as long as you have a finished quilt, that is all you can really hope for. Okay, so yeah, I'm hitting here on my 9.5 inches, here, here, and here, and back over here, so I know that that's as square as it's gonna get for me. And then I'm gonna trim the rest of this piece off. Of course, once you actually take your grid away, the block itself doesn't look too bad. Just remember that when you're lining it up, if you do have a little piece here and there that don't exactly match up for you, that you know you're just going to try and match these with your other 9.5-inch blocks that have been squared down. And then you will be sewing with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this will catch any unevenness that you have in the middle here and here when you're sewing your complete quilt together. If you found this tutorial helpful, even though I've made a couple mistakes on it, please like and subscribe, and I can bring you more quilting content of making blocks and also messing up blocks to my channel. And as always, happy quilting. And remember, it doesn't always have to be perfect. You can hide a lot with a 1/4 inch seam allowance.